Section I, 1000 words. They said the Duke's wife died of sorrow, but the truth was crueler. She had leapt from the cliffs of Hawthorne Hall before dawn, her white nightgown carried away by the wind like a broken vow. The sea swallowed her, and with her something in the Duke died too. That was 3 winters past, and still the estate bore the silence of a grave. Now, on a night swollen with rain, another carriage crept through the iron gates, not to bring joy but necessity. Inside sat Evelyn Fairborn, a governess with too much learning and too little fortune, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her heart pounded with a rhythm of dread and defiance. She had been dismissed once before for knowing too much Latin and speaking too little deceit. She could not afford to fail again. The wheels groaned over the cobblestones, the hall's silhouette emerging through sheets of rain. Hawthorne Hall, vast and watchful, its hundreds of windows shuttered like closed eyes. Inside she was greeted by the housekeeper, Mrs. Atwell, a woman of iron composure and frosted hair. "His Grace will see you in the morning," she said curtly, her tone suggesting it would be an ordeal, not an honor. "You'll be teaching Miss Clara in the East Wing. Lessons begin at 8 precisely. We value punctuality if not sentiment." Evelyn curtsied, her gown clinging damply to her skin. The air smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. Somewhere distant, a clock told midnight. She was shown to a small chamber with a single candle, a narrow bed, and a view of the rain-washed gardens where roses still clung stubbornly to life. She stood by the window, her reflection faint in the glass, pale, tired, defiant. Somewhere in this house, a man lived who had once inspired both envy and pity in every whisper of London. When dawn came, it was thin and gray. The first sight of the Duke of Hawthorne was not through introduction, but accident. Evelyn, carrying a stack of lesson books, turned a corner in the long corridor and nearly collided with him. He was taller than she expected, his dark hair streaked faintly with silver, his posture faultless. But what struck her was the stillness, as though he existed in another time entirely, where laughter and warmth had been forbidden. "Miss Fairborn," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "You are early." "I find lateness difficult to justify, Your Grace," she replied, lowering her eyes. He regarded her briefly, as though reading the title of a book he had no intention of finishing. "My sister is easily distracted. I trust you will not indulge her whims. She is to be instructed, not entertained." "Yes, Your Grace." He nodded once and passed her, yet in the brief exchange she sensed something beneath his austerity, a man exhausted by his own restraint. When his footsteps faded, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The morning lessons began. Miss Clara Hawthorne, barely 16, was clever but restless, eager for conversation, starved of affection. "You mustn't mind my brother," she said with a sigh as she traced Latin conjugations on the page. "He doesn't believe in happiness anymore. It's quite out of fashion here." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Then perhaps we shall bring it back into style." By midday, the governess had begun to feel the weight of the household's gaze. Servants paused in corridors when she passed. The butler, Mr. Gray, spoke with the polite disdain reserved for social intruders. And in the great dining hall, where portraits of Hawthorne ancestors stared down from their gilt frames, she overheard 2 footmen whispering. "They say His Grace only hired her because she reminds him of the Duchess." "Hush. You'll have her sent off like the last one." "The last one?" "Dismissed in a week. Too pretty for her own good." That evening, Evelyn dined alone in her small quarters, the echo of those words heavy in her chest. She was not vain, but she knew too well how quickly beauty, or the suspicion of it, could become a curse. Still, she told herself this post was a chance at survival, not sentiment. She would teach, obey, and endure. But fate, ever amused by resolve, had other plans. The next day, as the household prepared for the arrival of guests, relatives of the late Duchess, the Duke descended the grand staircase. The air shifted around him, conversation dimmed. His presence demanded silence, not through arrogance but gravity. Evelyn, standing aside, watched him give orders with effortless authority. He paused only once, when his gaze caught hers across the marble hall. For a heartbeat, something unguarded flickered there. Recognition, perhaps. Or the memory of a woman long lost. Then it was gone, shuttered as quickly as it appeared. The guests arrived at dusk. Among them, the Dowager Duchess, his mother, regal, sharp-eyed, dressed in mourning silk though her daughter-in-law's grave had long settled. Her words were knives wrapped in lace. "So you are the governess," she said to Evelyn. "The Duke insists on surrounding himself with charity cases. Do you play the pianoforte, Miss Fairborn?" "I do, Your Grace," Evelyn answered. Then you shall not. The sound carries into the West Wing and my son dislikes music. The humiliation was deliberate. The servants pretended not to hear. Evelyn curtsied and withdrew, dignity her only shield. But as she reached the corridor, she caught sight of the Duke standing in the doorway. He had heard. He said nothing. That night, when the household retired, Evelyn sat by her candle, fighting tears that felt unbecoming. Pride demanded silence, yet silence was lonely company. She took out a small notebook and began to write, a habit she'd kept since girlhood. Day 1 at Hawthorne Hall. The walls are beautiful and unkind. The Duke grieves like a man afraid of his own heart. I wonder what it would cost to be seen as something more than a duty fulfilled. She closed the book. Outside, wind rattled the panes. In the great hall below, the Duke stood before the portrait of his late wife, her painted smile brittle, eternal. The dowager's words echoed in his mind. She will ruin you as sentiment always does. He poured himself a measure of brandy and said to the silence, No woman will ruin me again. But when a faint melody drifted through the corridor, Evelyn humming softly to calm herself, he froze. The tune was the same his wife once played on stormy nights. Only this time it sounded alive, almost hopeful. He went to the door, hand poised to knock, then stopped. Pride won again. He turned away. The next morning, Evelyn entered the drawing room to find a hush of tension. Mrs. Atwell held a torn scrap of paper, the page from her private notebook. Someone had found it and delivered it to the dowager. The Duke grieves like a man afraid of his own heart, Mrs. Atwell read aloud. Poetic, Miss Fairborn, and most unwise. The color drained from Evelyn's face. That was never meant to be read. Then you should not have written it under his roof. Before Evelyn could answer, the Duke entered, summoned by the commotion. He looked at the page, then at her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched until even the ticking clock seemed to hold its breath. Burn it, he said finally, his voice like tempered glass. And let this be the last time my name finds its way into your private musings, Miss Fairborn. Yes, your grace. She curtsied, every nerve burning with humiliation. As she turned to leave, he added quietly, Your words were not inaccurate. Only ill-timed. Their eyes met, pride against shame, guilt against honesty, and in that charged stillness something fragile and dangerous was born. Neither of them spoke again that day. But both, for the first time in years, found themselves unable to sleep. The scandal began not with words, but with a silence too long held. A letter arrived at Hawthorne Hall sealed in gold, the king's crest pressed deep into the wax, commanding the Duke of Hawthorne to return to London for the spring season. The royal ball, the letter read, would not be complete without the attendance of one of His Majesty's most loyal peers. It was not a request. It was a command from a monarch who collected loyalty like jewels. For Alaric Hawthorne the summons was a curse. London meant eyes. Eyes meant whispers. And whispers had teeth. He had not set foot in the city since the tragedy, since the day his wife's name became synonymous with pity and shame. But duty as ever left no room for grief. The household was thrown into motion. Luggage prepared, carriages polished, and in the midst of this storm of order stood Evelyn Fairborn, her hands trembling over a trunk of silk gloves that were not her own. She was to accompany Miss Clara, the Duke's sister, as chaperone and instructor. Her heart leapt between fear and forbidden hope. To enter London under his protection, even as a servant, meant stepping into the heart of the very world that would scorn her existence. The journey south was long and quiet. Miss Clara slept, dreaming of dances and finery. Evelyn read, though her eyes never truly rested on the page. The Duke sat opposite her, the space between them dense with unspoken memory. Every turn of the wheels seemed to measure the distance between restraint and confession. Have you ever attended a ball, Miss Fairborn? He asked at last, his tone neutral but his gaze fixed out the window. Only in imagination, your grace, she replied softly. In my experience, music and laughter are for those born to afford them. He turned then, just enough for her to see the faintest curve of irony at his mouth. You may find the reality less forgiving than the dream. Forgiveness, she murmured, is rarely found where reputation dances. For a moment, his eyes flickered with something close to admiration, and guilt. He looked away. London received them with grandeur and venom. The great ballroom of Lancaster House glittered like a mirror to heaven, chandeliers dripping with light, silk gowns whispering secrets, and the king himself lounging beneath a canopy of crimson. The Duke, restored to his role among the living, bowed with perfect grace, every movement an act of performance. But it was Evelyn who drew the first ripple of notice. She stood near the marble columns, dressed modestly in pale blue, her gown simple yet refined, borrowed from the Duke's late wife's collection at his mother's insistence. Her presence was an error of etiquette, her beauty an error of fate. Men turned their heads, women turned their fans. The gossip began its slow, deliberate spread. "Who is she?" whispered Lady Ashcombe, her jeweled voice cutting the air. "A governess," someone murmured. "The Duke's latest act of charity." "Charity," Lady Ashcombe smiled thinly, "or temptation?" The Duke heard the laughter that followed. He had endured worse, but something in their tone, that easy cruelty directed at her, stirred an old, dangerous anger. Yet pride chained him still. To defend her publicly would be to acknowledge what he dared not feel. Evelyn endured the evening with grace that bordered on martyrdom. She danced once, with an aging viscount who complimented her posture as though she were a horse for auction. When she returned to the edge of the floor, she caught the Duke's gaze from across the crowd. It was not affection she saw there, but apology, an apology he could never voice. Later, when the music faded and the guests spilled into laughter and wine, she excused herself to the terrace. The night was cool, the city's hum far below. She breathed deeply, trying to steady the ache in her chest. For all her composure, she could not stop the tears that burned behind her eyes. Behind her, the door creaked open. His voice came low. "You should not be alone." "I am always alone, Your Grace," she said without turning. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "London is cruel to those who forget their place." She faced him then, her expression fragile yet fierce. "And what is my place, my lord? Beneath your pity? Beyond your defense?" His jaw tightened. "You know I cannot." "Cannot what?" Her voice broke, but she did not lower it. "Cannot be seen protecting what you secretly value? Or cannot forgive yourself enough to be kind?" The word struck like a blade, and he flinched as though she had drawn blood. Yet instead of anger, his face softened with something almost like sorrow. "You deserve a gentler life than the one I could give. Then why bring me into yours?" He said nothing. Only the silence between them, heavy with everything forbidden, spoke the truth neither dared to name. When she curtsied to leave, he caught her wrist. The touch was brief, but it sent a shock through both. "Evelyn," he murmured, the first time her name had ever passed his lips. It hung in the air like confession. "I did not mean to make your world smaller." She looked at him, eyes bright with unfallen tears. "You have only reminded me how small mine has always been." Then she was gone, leaving him alone beneath the cold stars, haunted by the echo of his own restraint. The following morning the scandal bloomed like rot. Someone, perhaps Lady Ashcombe herself, had spread word that the Duke had been seen in intimate conversation with his governess on the terrace. The tale grew with each retelling. A touch became an embrace a promise. The dowager received the news at breakfast, her fury masked by the precision with which she stirred her tea. "You have humiliated us," she said quietly when her son entered. "A Hawthorne's name will not be dragged through gossip columns for the sake of a woman paid by the month." "It was nothing," Alaric said. "A moment misinterpreted." "Moments," she replied, "are the currency of ruin." He left her chambers without reply, his composure immaculate. But that night, long after the household slept, Evelyn found a small parcel upon her dressing table, a silver locket, exquisitely simple, engraved with the words "for courage undeserved." Inside was no portrait, only a lock of dark hair bound in thread. She held it in trembling hands, torn between disbelief and wonder. No signature, no note, yet she knew. From that night on, she wore it beneath her gown, hidden close to her heart. And though the gossip quieted with time, the household seemed to breathe differently. Servants fell silent when she entered. The dowager's gaze grew sharper. Even Miss Clara, once open and affectionate, spoke with the cautious formality of someone taught to fear association. The Duke spoke to Evelyn only when necessity demanded it, his tone cool, his eyes unreadable. Yet every word carried the ache of absence. Every silence felt like a conversation unfinished. On the final evening of the London season, the family prepared to return north. Evelyn lingered by the window as the lamps of Mayfair glittered like stars in a shallow sky. Behind her, footsteps halted. "You should rest," came the Duke's voice, low, controlled. "I cannot sleep," she said. "Some dreams are heavier than waking." He hesitated as if fighting himself, then said softly, "When we return to Hawthorne, you will no longer be in my service." Her breath caught. "Have I displeased you, Your Grace?" His answer was quiet, merciless. "You have unsettled me." When she turned, he was already gone, leaving only the echo of his confession, and the silver locket glinting faintly against her skin, The dismissal came without ceremony, a single letter placed upon Evelyn's writing desk before dawn, its seal already broken by the hand that could not bear to deliver it face to face. She read it once, twice, then folded it with the same care one might give to a wound that would never close. The words were formal, mercifully brief, and utterly final. Your service is no longer required at Hawthorne Hall. She did not cry. Not when she packed her meager belongings, not when the servants pretended not to see, not even when she paused before the mirror and found her reflection hollowed by silence. Grief, she decided, was a luxury for those whose love had been permitted a name. Hers had been nothing but devotion lived in the shadows, a quiet treason that no one could ever forgive. By noon she was gone. Hawthorne Hall stood in stunned stillness after her departure, as though some vital thread had been pulled from its fabric. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Miss Clara wept privately, though she dared not speak her sorrow aloud. The dowager resumed her embroidery, each stitch precise as judgment. Only the Duke himself betrayed no sign of loss, not in posture, nor word, nor expression. But in the solitude of his study, Alaric Hawthorne could not still his hands. They shook as he poured his drink, the amber liquid trembling against the glass. The silence was unbearable, that same silence she had once filled with her quiet courage, her measured replies, her steady defiance. He had dismissed her to save them both. That was the truth he told himself each time her face rose before him in the dark. But truth, he was learning, could be crueler than deceit. 2 weeks later the letter arrived. Not hers, she would never have written, but one from London, stamped with the seal of Lord Ashcombe. It was a polite reminder of an unpaid debt, the King's request that the Duke attend the Midsummer Gala in honor of the visiting French delegation. Declining would be seen as defiance. Attending would mean reopening every wound London had so elegantly inflicted. He went. The night was suffocatingly perfect. Chandeliers blazing, violins keening, every noble eye upon him as if to measure how well disgrace had aged. He played his part flawlessly, smiling at barons, dancing with duchesses, drinking enough to dull the ache that no drink could erase. It was only near midnight, when the crowd thinned and the heat rose, that he stepped outside into the night. And there, as if conjured by his guilt, he saw her. Evelyn stood across the courtyard, speaking quietly to a gentleman of modest rank, her gown plain but immaculate, her posture composed. She had found new employment, perhaps as companion or governess, though her expression carried none of the serenity she once possessed. When she turned her head slightly and caught sight of him, the world narrowed to a single, shattering instant. Neither moved. The music inside faded to a distant hum. She inclined her head, polite, distant, unrecognizing. It was the gesture of a woman determined to erase the memory of who she had been. Alaric's throat constricted. For the first time in years he forgot how to breathe. A man approached her, tall, striking, far too comfortable in her company. He bent slightly to whisper something and she laughed, softly, beautifully, the sound cutting through the Duke like a blade drawn across glass. The stranger took her hand and led her back inside. Alaric did not follow. He returned to his carriage, every heartbeat echoing with the same thought: she has survived me. That night, he dreamed of her, not as she had been, but as she might become without him. Free. Unhaunted. And when he woke before dawn, his pillow was damp with something he refused to name. Days passed. Then weeks. In mid-July, word reached him of a carriage accident on the Western Road. A local coach overturned in the storm, one passenger gravely injured. He thought nothing of it until Miss Clara burst into his study, her face pale, a newspaper trembling in her hands. "Alaric," she whispered, using his name for the first time in years, "it's her." He snatched the paper, eyes devouring the words. The report was brief. Miss Evelyn Fairborn, formerly in the service of the Duke of Hawthorne, was injured last evening while en route to the seaside. The gentleman accompanying her perished instantly. Miss Fairborn was taken to the parish infirmary in Kent, her condition described as uncertain. Before the hour ended he was on horseback. The storm that had caused the accident had not yet passed. Wind tore at his cloak, rain lashed his face, but he rode without pause, driven by something far greater than fear. Guilt, love, desperation. It no longer mattered what name it bore. It was all that remained of him. He reached the infirmary near dusk. The small stone building reeked of smoke and medicine. Inside, the matron led him down a narrow hall, her expression wary. "She's weak," the woman said. "Concussion, bruising, and grief. The man with her was her fiancé, I believe. Poor soul, they say he shielded her with his body." Alaric stopped. The word fiancé struck him harder than the storm. He could not ask her to repeat it. He only nodded once, then pushed open the door. Evelyn lay upon the narrow bed, her skin pale against the linen, her hair loose about her face. Her eyes were closed, her breath shallow but steady. For a moment he simply stood there, unable to move. Then he crossed the room, knelt beside her, and took her hand. It was cold. "You loved him," he whispered. The words were not accusation but confession. "And I deserve every moment of your forgetting." Her lashes fluttered. Slowly, painfully, her eyes opened. She looked at him for a long time, as though trying to separate dream from memory. "You shouldn't have come," she murmured. "I couldn't stay away." Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "You never could, my lord. Not even when you wanted to." He bowed his head, his voice breaking. "I let you go to save you. And all I did was lose myself." She studied him, weary but lucid. "You cannot save what was never yours to claim." He laughed softly, a sound more broken than bitter. "Then let me have this moment at least, not as your master, but as a man who once loved and never stopped." For a long time she said nothing. Then her fingers moved, the faintest pressure against his palm. "Love me in silence then," she said. "It suits us both." He closed his eyes. Her hand slipped from his grasp as the matron entered quietly to adjust the lamp. The storm outside had begun to fade, leaving only the low murmur of thunder in the distance. When he finally rose to leave, he looked back once more. She was sleeping again, her face peaceful, her breathing steady. For the first time since she'd left Hawthorne Hall, he felt both utterly destroyed and profoundly alive. He stepped into the corridor, the matron following behind. "She'll recover," she said softly. "She's strong." He nodded, though the words barely reached him. At the door he paused, turning toward the window. Lightning flashed across the horizon, illuminating the fields beyond. In that brief, merciless light, he saw the impossible, Evelyn's silver locket hanging from his own pocket, though. He swore he had left it in his study weeks ago. His breath caught. And then the light was gone, leaving only darkness, and the terrible, unshakable question of who had placed it there. The news came at dawn, the kind that steals the air before it reaches the lungs. Evelyn Fairborn had vanished from the infirmary without a trace. No note, no witness, only an open window and the faint scent of heather carried by the morning wind. The matron swore she had been too weak to walk, let alone travel, yet her bed was empty, the sheets cold. To those who tended her, it seemed an act of divine mystery. To Alaric Hawthorne, it felt like punishment from a god who never forgave arrogance. He rode back to Hawthorne Hall under a sky the color of morning, the countryside a blur of wet fields and skeletal trees. Guilt rode beside him, whispering every word he'd left unsaid. He had begged to see her again, only to lose her to silence once more, a silence deeper, crueler than before. By the time he reached his estate, the world had shifted imperceptibly. What once was duty had become obsession. What once was grief had become atonement. That evening the great house echoed with absence. Servants moved quietly, wary of the master's return. Miss Clara approached him in the corridor, her eyes red with unshed tears. "Did you find her?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No trace." She hesitated. "They say her fiancé's family claimed the body this morning. They took him to Kent for burial." Alaric's jaw tightened. "And her?" "No one knows." He turned away before she could see the tremor in his hands. "Then I'll find her myself." 4 days he scoured every road leading south, every parish, every traveler's inn. He questioned merchants, doctors, clergymen. Some claimed to have seen a woman matching her description boarding a carriage toward Dover. Others swore she had been taken in by a convent on the coast. The more he searched, the more she slipped into myth, half memory, half ghost. When he finally returned home, the locket still hung from his pocket, its presence both anchor and curse. Inside it, he discovered a lock of pale hair and a note folded so tightly it might have gone unnoticed forever. "You cannot lose what was never yours," it read. "But I will pray you remember what it meant to try." For the first time Alaric wept. Autumn descended upon England in hues of rust and regret. Hawthorne Hall remained closed to visitors, its master consumed by letters and solitude. Yet one night, as the rain whispered against the glass, a messenger arrived from London. The letter bore a crest he recognized instantly, the Ashcombe seal. "Your Grace," it read, "a matter most delicate has come to light concerning Miss Fairborn. It would be unwise to speak of it in writing. Attend me at once and alone." By dawn he was already bound for the city. London was a cruel mirror, glittering, deceitful, alive with gossip. As his carriage cut through the fog of Mayfair, he could feel the stares, the whispers, the unspoken satisfaction of those who had once called him proud. Lord Ashcombe awaited him in a candlelit chamber at his club, a place thick with cigar smoke and secrets. "Alaric," the man greeted, voice heavy with pity. "I wish the news were kinder." The Duke said nothing. Ashcombe poured them each a drink. "You're Miss Fairborn." She was seen, alive and in most unfortunate company. A pamphlet circulated last week, describing her as the mistress of a French envoy. It is, of course, likely nonsense, but the damage... Enough. Alaric, the scandal will not fade easily. The king himself. I said enough. His voice was low, dangerous, trembling at its edges. Ashcombe sighed. If you truly care for her, then protect her by forgetting her. The world is cruel to women who fall from grace. You can save neither her reputation nor your own. The Duke rose without reply, leaving the untouched glass behind. That night, he found himself walking aimlessly through the fog-laden streets of Westminster, his coat damp, his thoughts darker still. The idea of Evelyn living beneath another man's protection, perhaps unwillingly, perhaps out of desperation, ignited something fierce within him. Not jealousy. Not even anger. It was grief sharpened into purpose. He sought out every name tied to the rumor until at last, one led him to a modest townhouse on the outskirts of the city. A widow's residence, the neighbors said. She kept to herself, saw few visitors, but sometimes in the evenings, music could be heard, soft, melancholic, a woman's voice singing to no one. He waited until the lamps were lit before approaching. The sound of the piano reached him before the door did, the same melody she had once played for his late wife, gentle and uncertain, a song of beginnings cut short. When she opened the door, she looked neither startled nor afraid. Only tired. "Your Grace," she said quietly, "you should not be here." He removed his hat, his voice rough. "Then why did you leave the locket?" "I thought it would remind you to let me go." "It reminded me that I never could." Her eyes softened, but her shoulders remained squared. "What you seek cannot be returned. My life, whatever it is now, no longer belongs to your world." "I do not care about the world," he said. "Only the truth." She hesitated, glancing toward the darkened parlor. "The truth, then, I was to marry a kind man I did not love, because he offered safety I could not find in your shadow. He died because he tried to protect me. Do you understand what that means? To owe your life to a love you never felt." He stepped closer, rain dripping from his hair. "And what of the love you did feel?" Her breath hitched. "That one destroyed everything it touched." "Then let it destroy me too," he whispered. The words hung between them, fragile as glass. For the first time since the accident, she faltered. "Do you think ruin becomes you, Alaric?" "Only if it brings me closer to you." Her composure cracked. "You cannot save me with tenderness. The world will not forgive what we were, and neither will I." He reached out, his hand trembling near hers but not daring to touch. "Then allow me this, Evelyn. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Only the chance to stand beside you once more, even if it is the last kindness we ever share." The silence that followed was almost sacred. She looked at him, the proud man undone, the sinner stripped of pretense, and for one fleeting instant, her heart betrayed her resolve. Then she stepped back. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "If you truly mean what you say, meet me by the river at dawn. Alone." Before he could reply, the door closed softly between them. Alaric stood in the rain, the sound of the piano resuming behind the walls, the same haunting melody, now filled with sorrow. He turned away, the locket cold against his chest, his breath visible in the fog. When he finally reached the corner, he looked back once, and saw a shadow watching from the upper window, a man's silhouette framed in candlelight. He froze. The song stopped. And in the hollow silence that followed, the truth struck him with brutal clarity. Evelyn had not been alone. The scream shattered the dawn. It tore through the fog like a wound in the quiet, pulling Alaric from half-sleep into a world already unraveling. He had spent the night pacing the banks of the Thames, waiting for Evelyn's promised meeting, but no one had come. Now, as the bells tolled 7, the cry echoed again, distant, human, unmistakable. He ran toward it, his boots striking against the slick cobblestones until he reached the bridge. A crowd had gathered, faces pale and murmuring. Someone had fallen, or been pushed. "'Twas a lady," a man muttered, pulling his coat tighter. "Saw her from the railing just before she went over. Like she meant it." The world stopped. Alaric forced his way through, his voice raw. "Where?" The man pointed to the dark, swirling river below. The water churned with the current, swallowing whatever truth it carried. Alaric's heart roared in his chest. Without hesitation he leapt. The shock of the cold nearly crushed his lungs, but he pushed downward, searching through the black water until his hands brushed against silk. He broke the surface gasping, Evelyn's limp form clutched to his chest. The current tried to wrench her away, but he held tighter, dragging her toward the bank with every ounce of strength left in him. By the time they reached the mud, his arms were trembling, his vision fading. Her hair clung to her face, her lips were pale as porcelain. "Breathe," he begged, shaking her gently. "Evelyn, breathe." For a terrible moment nothing happened. Then a faint cough, fragile, defiant, broke through the air. She turned her head, water spilling from her mouth. He laughed and sobbed in the same breath, pressing his forehead to hers. "You fool," she whispered weakly, voice trembling. "You should have let me go." "Never," he said. "Not while I live." Later, inside a riverside inn, she lay before the fire wrapped in blankets. The innkeeper, a kind woman with tired eyes, brewed broth and asked no questions. Alaric sat beside Evelyn's bed, every flicker of flame casting shadows across his face. When she finally stirred, he saw the pain that lived beneath her composure. "I saw him," Alaric said quietly. "The man in your window." She closed her eyes. "He is not what you think." "Then tell me what he is." Her hands tightened around the blanket. "A ghost of my past. The fiancé you thought dead was not the man I was meant to marry. Before him there was another, a soldier who betrayed the crown and me with it. I helped him once, long ago, believing I was saving a life. When his treason was discovered, he swore I would never be free of him. He found me again, Alaric. He's been following me since the accident." Alaric rose, pacing before the hearth. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you are a duke," she said bitterly. "Because your life is built upon rules, and mine has been nothing but the breaking of them. I thought if I disappeared he would let me go. But he wanted the letters, ones he wrote before his arrest. They were hidden at Hawthorne Hall, among your late wife's possessions. That's why I took the locket. Inside it was the key to the box where they were kept." Alaric froze. "You mean the locket I found in my pocket?" "I left it there," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "To warn you. He was already in your house." The fire crackled. Outside, rain began to fall again, steady as fate. Alaric turned toward her, horror dawning. Then the break-in, the missing papers. "He's desperate," she whispered. "He blames you for my silence. He thinks I loved you more than I feared him." Alaric moved closer, kneeling beside her. "He's wrong. You feared nothing." She gave a faint, weary smile. "You never did understand me, my lord. I feared everything. Especially you." Before he could reply, a noise sounded outside, the soft crunch of boots on wet earth. Both froze. Alaric stood, his hand instinctively reaching for the small pistol on the table. The door creaked open, the firelight spilling across the figure in the threshold. It was him. A man in a tattered officer's coat, his face gaunt, his eyes wild with something between grief and rage. "How tender," he murmured, stepping inside. "The Duke saves the governess. The story writes itself." Evelyn sat up, her strength failing her voice. "Edward, please. Don't. Don't what?" He smiled thinly. "Don't remind you what loyalty cost me? I rotted in a cell while you played saint in silk halls." His gaze snapped to Alaric. "And you, noble, righteous, untouchable. You think your title can wash her sins away?" Alaric leveled the pistol. "Step back." Edward laughed, a broken sound. "Do you truly think I came unarmed?" He moved faster than Alaric expected. A flash of metal, a struggle, the gun clattering to the floor. The two men collided, knocking over the table, the lamp shattering as oil spread across the rug. Flames leapt instantly, devouring the air with heat. Evelyn screamed, struggling to rise as the fire roared around them. Alaric slammed Edward against the wall, his voice hoarse. "She's not yours." Edward grinned through the smoke. "No, she's no one's." With sudden, vicious strength, he drove Alaric backward into the firelit chaos. The pistol lay between them. Both reached for it. A single shot rang out. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then Edward staggered, eyes wide, and collapsed beside the hearth. Smoke curled above him like a benediction. Evelyn crawled toward Alaric, her breath ragged. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, his face streaked with soot. "No. But we must go." The flames climbed the curtains now, licking at the beams. He pulled her into his arms and carried her through the door as the ceiling cracked and fell behind them. They stumbled into the rain, coughing, trembling, alive. Outside, the villagers gathered, shouting for water, for help. Alaric set Evelyn down beneath the shelter of a tree, his body shaking with exhaustion. She touched his face, her fingers trembling. "You saved me again," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "No. This time I think you saved me." They watched as the inn burned, the fire's glow bleeding into the morning fog. For a long time neither spoke. The rain hissed against the flames, 1,000 tiny prayers for mercy. Finally Evelyn turned to him. "It's over," she said softly. He looked at her, his eyes dark with something unspoken. "No, Evelyn. It's only begun." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He reached into his coat, pulling from his pocket a damp scrap of paper, a fragment of Edward's letter, scorched but legible. In a jagged hand, one line stood out. "She told me everything, about the night your wife died." Evelyn's breath caught. Alaric stared at her, the rain dripping from his lashes. "What did he mean, Evelyn?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. The fire crackled behind them, the dawn breaking cold and gray. And in that fragile silence, the truth hovered between them, heavy, dangerous, and waiting to be spoken. The slap echoed through the gray morning, sharp as thunder. Alaric did not flinch. Evelyn's palm trembled against the aftermath, her eyes wide, her breath breaking. "You think I meant for it to happen?" she cried. "You think I wanted your wife to die?" Her words sliced the air, each syllable carrying the weight of years buried under guilt and silence. They stood upon the cliffs overlooking the sea, the wind tearing through their coats, salt clinging to their lips like sorrow. Behind them, the charred remains of the inn still smoked faintly, ghosts rising with the mist. Alaric's jaw tightened. "Tell me the truth." Evelyn's voice trembled. "You wouldn't believe it if I did. Then damn me for trying." Her eyes met his, fierce, broken, alive. "Your wife didn't fall from the balcony that night. She jumped." The world stilled. Even the sea seemed to hush. Alaric's breath caught, his heart refusing to understand. "That's not possible." "I was there, I saw her fall." "You saw her after," Evelyn whispered. "You saw what I wanted you to see." The confession unfurled like blood across linen. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. "She came to me that night. Drunk, angry, terrified. She'd found the letters, the ones from Edward, proof of his betrayal. She thought you were part of it, that you knew. She said you'd rather die than face scandal, that she'd rather jump than live in your pity. I tried to stop her, Alaric. God knows I did." He could barely form words. "You were there?" "I was the one who found her standing on the railing," she said, her voice breaking. "I caught her hand when she slipped, but she let go. She chose to fall. I screamed for help, but by the time you arrived she was gone. And when I saw your face I knew, I could not tell you. You needed to believe it was an accident. You needed someone to blame. And I let you choose me." The memory hit him like fire. The storm, the broken railing, the glimmer of silk vanishing into the dark. He remembered Evelyn's voice calling his name, faint and trembling, her hands stained with blood and rain. He had never asked how she came to be there. Until now. He stepped back, unable to breathe. "All these years. I kept your secret," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "The scandal that would have destroyed you, I buried it. But it destroyed me instead." Silence stretched between them, vast and merciless. At last Alaric spoke, his tone hollow. "And Edward knew." She nodded faintly. "He was her cousin. He found the letters after her death. When I refused to join him in blackmail, he swore he'd expose everything. I thought if I vanished he would lose interest. But he followed me, to Kent, to London, even to your hall." Alaric closed his eyes, the truth crashing down with unbearable weight. "All this time I hated the wrong ghost." The wind roared, tearing her words to pieces before they could fully form. "I never meant to love you," she said softly. "You were my sin and my salvation both. I told myself that saving you would be enough. But I was wrong." He turned toward her then, every trace of fury dissolving into something rawer. "You think I care for redemption? You've haunted me since the moment I saw you. Love made me cruel, Evelyn. But it also made me alive." She shook her head, her expression filled with desperate tenderness. "Love cannot exist in ruin." "Then let it live in ruin," he said fiercely. "Let it live in whatever wreckage we have left." She gave a small, sorrowful laugh. "You don't understand. I am leaving England." The words cut deeper than any betrayal. "There is nothing left for me here," she continued. "The papers will call me a fallen woman, a murderer's accomplice, a mistress. I won't give them the satisfaction of watching me break. And where will you go? He asked, voice shaking. France, she said simply. There's a convent near Rouen that takes in women who wish to disappear. They don't ask questions there. He stepped closer, his hand finding hers despite everything. And you would live out your days behind stone walls? You who once filled this house with light. I would rather live in silence than under shame. He cupped her face in his palms, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. Then let me bear your shame. Let me carry it as I should have from the beginning. Tears welled in her eyes. And what of your title? Your name? He smiled faintly. They mean nothing if you are gone. For a moment the storm quieted. The sea below shimmered silver, the horizon blurring into mist. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes as if memorizing him by touch alone. I wish I could believe you, she whispered. He kissed her forehead, his lips lingering. Then let me prove it. The sound came then, the distant gallop of horses on the road below. Voices followed, shouting, urgent. A rider appeared on the ridge, waving a folded letter. Your Grace. Alaric turned, his heart already sinking. The messenger dismounted, breathless, mud splattering his boots. From the Home Office, he said. Urgent matter concerning Edward Marlowe. They found a confession among his belongings. Alaric tore the seal open. The parchment bore Edward's unmistakable scrawl, a final testament written before his death. It was I who pushed her. She threatened to expose me. The governess tried to save her, but I could not let her speak. Tell Hawthorne I did it for the crown, though it was only ever for myself. The words blurred as Alaric read them again and again, his vision swimming. He looked at Evelyn, her face pale, her lips parted in disbelief. The truth had come too late. You're free, he whispered. Do you hear me? You're free. But she only stared at him, tears falling soundlessly. Freedom, she said, means nothing when the heart is still in chains. He caught her as she swayed, exhaustion and shock stealing her strength. The wind howled around them, carrying the smell of sea and smoke, of endings and beginnings intertwined. I'll go with you, he said fiercely. France, the convent, wherever you go. She smiled faintly against his chest. You were born to light, Alaric. Don't follow me into shadow. He held her tighter, refusing to release her hand. Then I'll wait until the light finds the shadow again. Below, the tide surged higher, waves colliding with the cliffs in relentless rhythm. When he finally looked down, he realized she had pressed something into his palm, her locket warm from her touch. Inside, beneath the faded lock of hair, was a single folded note. He opened it with trembling fingers. If love is ruin, then let ruin be our eternity. The wind tore the words from his hand, carrying them toward the sea. He watched them vanish into the gray, his heart both shattered and reborn in the same breath. For in losing her once more he finally understood. Some loves are not meant to be mended. They are meant to endure, unending like grief, and just as holy.